China just announced a new GDP growth target that is 4.5% to 5%. This is the lowest since 1991. And what does this mean? Does this mean that the Chinese economy is slowing down? Does this mean the Chinese economy is no longer so dynamic as before? Or does this mean that the Chinese policymakers are becoming more pragmatic, more realistic? Let's analyze this. Now, every year in March, everybody looks at the National People's Congress of China in Beijing, and the single most important number from this National People's Congress meeting is the GDP target. And this year, the announcement is a range rather than a single number between 4.5 to 5%. This is the lowest since 1991. And what is year 1991? The year 1991 was the year when the Soviet Union was collapsing. This was the year when China was dealing with the aftermath of the Tiananmen event. And these numbers are not just the economic indicators, it's indicator of various issues, including social, political, and the mentality of policymakers. So let's analyze this. The first signal is that the policymakers do recognize the ongoing problems of the Chinese economy. They are following ongoing problems. Number one is the contraction of fixed asset investment. Simply put, investment in real sector, not in the financial markets. For the first time in the past 30 decades, the Chinese economy's fixed asset investment contracted or have negative growth. And this is very rare for the Chinese economy. Second difficulty is that the property market is still declining. Remember that for Chinese households, on average, 80 to 90% of their assets are in the property market, and the total amount of assets, or value of assets of households in the property market is about 2 to 3 times of the GDP every year. So this is a tremendous event. The third difficulty is the overall lack of enthusiasm of consumers. Consumers are not forthcoming in their decision of buying goods. So there is a big imbalance between strong supply and weak demand in the Chinese economy. So policymakers do recognize this. The second signal is that the policymakers do recognize that they will have to do a lot of homework before they can realize the announced target of 2035. The goal of 2035 is for China to join the clubs of high-income countries. By that, most economists agree that China's per capita GDP should be over $20,000, whereas the current per capita GDP is $14,000. So in order to achieve the goal of 2035, from now to 2035, China's average annual GDP growth rate should be over 4.6%. So putting these two things together, that is the current economic difficulties and the long-term goal, this year's moderate target of GDP growth means that the policymakers want to repair the economy, want to reduce the imbalances of the economy, want the economy to repair before the economic growth can pick up. So it is a modest, pragmatic, and realistic GDP growth target. It signals the determination or commitment for the Chinese economy to solve the current economic problems, including lack of demand, including lack of basic social welfare, including local government debt, including property market adjustment, so on and so forth. So what is the implication for investors and households outside China? Well, I think at least two. Number one, the Chinese economy is making adjustment, and many investors actually should pay attention to this. For example, they can invest in consumption-related industries and companies, and also they can invest in technological upgrading industries in order to benefit from China's economic adjustment. The second is that China's export will continue to increase, because in the process of economic adjustment, it is inevitable for China to rely upon foreign markets to make up for the low domestic demand. So international companies in the process will have to make up plans to sustain the pressure from China's export. So all in all, let me emphasize, the Chinese economy is slowing down this year relative to previous years. However, this slowing down is preparing for faster growth in the coming decade. Even though the announced GDP target is moderate, I really want to emphasize that it is the nominal GDP rather than the real GDP that matters. What is nominal GDP? Nominal GDP is today's GDP growth combined with price increase. Now this year, even though the GDP target is moderate, even though it's likely for the GDP growth to slow down, meanwhile, the price increase will recover. China most likely will come back from a deflationary environment to moderately inflationary environment. So all combined, the nominal GDP growth rate will go up, okay? In comparison with last year's nominal GDP growth rate was just slightly over 4%. This year, I would predict it is certainly over 5%. I'm talking about, again, nominal GDP growth rates.